Dr. Meg Carroll, who's on the board here at the Irish American Heritage Museum, Dr. Margaret Lasch Carroll, to give us her take on the uncanny in the fiction of Tana French. She did tell me to warn you that there might be a few spoilers, but not for the new one. So you're supposed to have read all the old books before. And did I say we'll leave all these lights on? We will. Okay, good. Yeah. So we're leaving all the lights on, and your things to turn down there on at the side. You did. It's on. Okay. So we're good to go. Okay. Thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the podium way over here, so I'm not looking directly at that light for the slide, so I apologize if I'm a little bit at an angle to you. I think I'll begin just by asking how many of you have read books by Tana French? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So good. Has anyone read the new one, The Searcher? No, I know it just came out. So I actually do talk about it, but I don't spoil it too much, I know. Okay. All right. So the title of today, and by the way, we can have a discussion afterwards, so I hope you'll stick around for a little bit to talk about the novels. The title of today's talk is The Uncanny in Tana French, a very Halloweenish topic. I hope to illustrate French's use of the uncanny in her fiction, and then bring that topic into a more central preoccupation with contemporary Irish literature, that of trauma. In the midst of thinking of this talk, and the ways French's 7th novel, The Witch Elm, is doing something different from her first 6, French went and released an 8th novel. So of course I had to run out and buy it a couple of weeks ago, and I broke my new rule that I was going to be using the library more, but first day it was for sale and it was a hardcover. Let's see, so the Searcher, and this is the new book, really could be my favorite. There we go. The Searcher could be my favorite. Let's see. Despite differences, however, I think there are still overarching thematic threads that bind all of French's fiction. Even though categorized as an Irish author, Tana French is an American, born in Burlington, Vermont in 1973. Her family lived in Florence, Washington, D.C., Malawi, and Rome, and of course Burlington, because of her father's job. And French actually has dual American and Italian citizenship. She moved to Dublin in 1990 to attend Trinity College and has lived in Dublin ever since. She earned a BA from Trinity and then worked as an actor until publishing her first novel, In the Woods, in 2007. Her reviewers link her spot-on ear for dialogue to her experience on the stage. She's published 8 novels in the last 12 years, all set in Ireland. She's won numerous awards, including the Edgar, Anthony, McCavity, and Barry Awards, the Los Angeles Award for the Best Mystery Thriller, and the Irish Book Award for Crime Fiction. She's sold 7 million copies worldwide, and her novels have been translated into 37 languages, and she's sold 4 million copies of her novels in the U.S. In 2019, BBC produced an 8-episode series based on her first 2 novels, In the Woods and The Likeness, and the series is called Dublin Murders. The Stars channel carries the series in the U.S., and there's talk about a second series. About her fiction, she said in one interview, "I'm always looking for the potential mystery in things." She's now married to a Dublin man, and they have 2 daughters and live in Dublin. Her novels are intense, multi-layered stories, at once murder mysteries full of sudden and frightening plot twists, and serious fiction with a profound sense of place and social histories of those places. Her fiction concerns class conflicts and the impact of trauma on identity, attitudes, and behavior. About the latter, she examines traumatic events in her characters' pasts, both distant and recent, and dramatizes the repercussions of those events in the present in particular settings. Her use of the uncanny is a result of both her concern with trauma, her deep awareness of the power of place, and our human connection to the natural world. One thing all of her fiction does is study individual lives changed by the most extreme trauma, death. And she uses the murder mystery police procedural genre to heighten the trauma of death with murder. Her first 6 novels, now grouped together as the Dublin Murder Squad series, are narrated by a different detective in the Dublin murder squad, and each murder being investigated somehow resonates with the past of the primary investigator by dredging up something traumatic from his or her past. Her 7th and 8th novels are billed as standalone novels, but in these two, we see investigators at work and past and present parallels. So we have multiple levels of trauma, those affected by the present violence and those remembering the past violence. And each novel, French also uses Irish settings to suggest different disturbing historical circumstances to capture a collective past, thus mirroring individual experience with national trauma. Before we look at the novels, let's start with the definition. Merriam-Webster defines uncanny as seeming to have a supernatural character or origin, eerie, mysterious, and being beyond what is normal or expected, suggesting superhuman or supernatural powers. All these descriptors fit French's fiction. The most uncanny element in each novel, including the latest, is that each is built upon a strange coincidence. Protagonists confront situations in time present that dredge up painful memories of their own pasts or the parallel patterns of their own lives, and there are really specific parallels. These uncanny or strange coincidences, too strange to be natural, form the basis of each story. The situation in time present of the novel thus becomes an investigation of the past. Then within each story, there are other examples of the uncanny, unexplained, odd, eerie, or supernatural occurrences. French especially portrays nature or the natural world as eerie. It is imbued with something more potent, more conscious, sometimes more malevolent than we are used to or aware of. Here are a few examples from the Dublin Murder Squad novels where this doubling of past and present involves investigators assigned crimes that mirror their pasts. French's first novel, In the Woods, finds detectives Rob Ryan and Cassie Maddox investigating the murder of a 12-year-old girl whose body is found on an ancient sacrificial stone at an archaeological dig outside of Dublin. The site of the murder, coincidentally and uncannily, happens to be next to a 70-ish housing development that Rob grew up in, and the dig was the woods that two of Rob's childhood friends disappeared from when they were 12. 20 years before, Rob went into the woods with them and reappeared that evening, alone, injured, covered in blood, and not remembering what happened. The other two children have never been found. Rob has never regained his memory of that day, and the succeeding 20 years seems to be a series of attempts to escape from that day. The family moved, Rob changes his name from Adam to Rob, and his parents send him to a boarding school in England where he takes on an English accent. In the novel's time present, as the case wears on, Rob convinces himself the two crimes are related and obsesses over his amnesia. He unofficially opens the old police case to solve the current one, and then eerie things begin to happen. In a heightened manic state, and I'll give you a couple quotes from the novel, in a heightened manic state one evening, driving from the site back to Dublin, he's with his partner Cassie in the car, he sees a dark shape, too large for a fox, too small for a human, limp across the road. And this is a quote from the novel. I hit the brakes hard. I think both Cassie and I yelled. Something had darted across the road in front of the car, something dark and low to the ground, with the sinuous gait of a weasel or a stoat. But much too big for either, and disappeared into the overgrown hedge on the other side. We slammed forward in our seats. I couldn't make my hands release their grip on the steering wheel. What the hell was that? Cass was looking at me with something new in her eyes, something that scared me almost as badly as the creature had. Cassie says, I didn't see an animal. Later he attempts to sleep in the woods. He attempts to sleep in the woods for the night to jog his memory and has a nightmarish experience. I apologize, this is a long quote, but I think it gives you the flavor of his experience. So this is Rob. I don't know how long I slept. I was sitting up and biting back a shout before I was even fully awake. Someone had said clear and sharp and right next to my ear, "What's that?" I sat up for a long time, feeling slow waves of blood surging in my neck. Gradually, I became aware that under the sleeping bag I was drenched with sweat, that my back pressed against the tree trunk was so rigid that I was shaking, my head nodding in stiff, convulsive jerks like a toy's. The pittering sound was catching all through the wood, rising and falling, growing closer on every side. The hairs rose in the back of my neck. Rain, I told myself, with whatever was left of my mind, just rain, though I couldn't feel it drop. Off at the other side of the woods, something screamed, a shrill, witless sound. The darkness in front of me was shifting, condensing. There was a sound like wind in the leaves, a great rushing wind coming down through the wood to clear a path. Somewhere across the clearing, something breathed, something big. Down by the river, skidding to a stop, willow branches swaying, and the water firing off splinters of light like a million tiny mirrors, blinding, dizzying. I ran. Brambles clawed at my legs and hair. Wing beats exploded in my ear. I shoulder barged straight into a tree trunk, knocking myself breathless. Invisible dips and hollows flecked open under my feet, and I couldn't run fast enough. Legs crashing knee-deep through underbrush. Trailing ivy wrapped my face, and I think I screamed. I knew beyond all doubt I would never get out of the wood. They would find my sleeping bag and nothing else, ever. There was a harsh, gasping sound loud in my ears, but I couldn't tell whether it came from me. Like every detective, I had taken it for granted that I was the hunter. It had never once occurred to me that I might have been the hunted all along. For Rob, the case drives him to a breakdown. And in case you haven't read the novel, I'll say no more. Cassie Maddox's story continues in French's next novel, The Likeness. The very basis of the novel rests on the uncanny. Cassie investigates the murder of Lexi Madison, a woman who could be her identical twin. And to add the improbable to an already impossible coincidence, the victim had stolen Cassie's underground identity that she used several years before when working undercover, an identity she gave up after an attempt was made on her life. The murder of Cassie's twin is kept a secret, and Cassie is sent undercover again to continue the victim's life as her own alias, with a group of Trinity College graduate students who have isolated themselves from modern Dublin student life in a 19th century big house in the Wicklow Mountains. The body is found in the ruins of a famine cottage on the grounds of the manor house. Each housemate then is a suspect in the murder. So here's Cassie in an isolated rural setting in a creaky old mansion with 4 people, one of whom may have murdered her. All the ingredients of a Gothic horror story. At times Cassie senses Lexi's presence, and the rural Wicklow setting, the isolation, the old-fashioned home, seem to Cassie to stop time, and French infuses the surrounding woods with a consciousness and a watchfulness that is palpable to Cassie, and both buffers the TCD students from the outside world and traps them in an alternate reality. If uncanny can mean unexpected and weird coincidences, Faithful Place, French's third novel, also qualifies. Human bones are found in an abandoned terrace house in Dublin's Liberties. Cassie's CO in The Likeness, Frank Mackey, has the narrative spotlight on him this time. The body turns out to be a murder victim and is found in the house next to the abandoned house, next to Frank's family, a family Frank fled from 20 years before, after the girlfriend Frank was planning on running away with those 20 years before never showed up. The very old bones turn out to be those of his girlfriend, Rosie. Here are the ingredients for the uncanny. We have an abandoned house and human bones and murder. There certainly are creaky boards and an eerie stillness and ghostly memories that haunt Frank. Broken Harbor, French's fourth novel, sees Michael Scorcher Kennedy, who we met as the investigator in Faithful Place, and I think you can see a trend now that a minor detective in one novel becomes the major player in the next. So Michael Scorcher Kennedy, who we met in The Investigator in Faithful Place, here investigating the murders of an entire family, mother, father, and 2 children. Along with the horrifying deaths, the investigators find several holes in the walls of their new large suburban estate home. Here's an excerpt from the story. And the speaker is Michael Kennedy, the policeman. Then I saw the hole in the wall. Someone had moved the phone table in front of it, but it was big enough that a jagged half moon still poked out. That was when I felt it, that needle-fine vibration starting in my temples and moving down the bones to my eardrums. Call it what you want. Social deviance, psychological disturbance, the animal within, evil, if you believe in that. It's the thing we spend our lives chasing. Above the gas fire was another hole in the wall, about the size of a dinner plate. There was a bigger one by the sofa. More holes in the walls, one high above the table, a big one behind. Somewhere far inside my spine and deep in the palms of my hands, something hummed, like a sound too low to hear, like a warning, like a cello string when a tuning fork strikes the perfect tone to call it awake. Kennedy and his partner find cameras mounted in ceiling corners and weirdly behind cabinets, and a huge animal trap in the attic, much larger than any of the rodents people would usually catch in their attics. They find a decapitated bird outside a sliding back door. Forensic specialists cannot explain the bird, the traps, and the holes. To enhance the mood, the seaside house is located a ways out from Dublin in one of Ireland's ghost estates. Housing estates begun at the height of the Celtic Tiger and halted midway after the economic crash. The development is sparsely populated, unfinished houses are vandalized and falling apart, and overgrown, unkempt shrubs obscure fences and doors, and tumbleweeds roll down streets alongside water rats and tomcats. Here's another excerpt that oozes eeriness. And the speaker is Michael Kennedy, the detective. And the we is his assistant, a newer detective. As we got deeper into the estate, the houses got sketchier, like watching a film in reverse. Pretty soon they were random collections of walls and scaffolding with the odd gaping hole for a window. Where the house fronts were missing, the rooms were littered with broken ladders, lengths of pip, rotting cement bags. No one lived here. Almost straight away we were lost. A tiny dart of panic shot through me. I never liked losing my bearings. Then Richie's head went up. He said, "What's that?" It was a short, raw, ripped open shriek, repeating over and over, so regular it sounded mechanical. When Michael was a boy, this area was a seaside holiday park with sand dunes and caravans. His family came for many years until tragedy befell his family, a tragedy Michael too has kept at arm's length ever since. This is his first time back, and his mind moves back and forth from the tragedy of his case to the tragedy of his adolescence. French's fifth novel brings back Stephen Moran, a new investigator from Faithful Place, and introduces Antoinette Conway. We also meet high school student Holly Mackey, Frank's daughter, also from Faithful Place. The Secret Place is about the murder of a high school boy in the grounds of an exclusive girls' boarding school, and is a taut coming-of-age story. The Uncanny borders on witchiness, with Holly and her three roommates discovering they can harness their adolescent hormonal power to alter their physical world. And here's a quote from this novel. Becca is up on her knees on the bed, fists clenched and hair crackling with fury. The light bulb spits a furious sizzle, pops and goes out. They all scream. Then the lights flick back on. Selena says to Becca, "Did you do that?" "Yesterday morning," Selena says, "when we were getting ready and I was getting something off my bedside table, my hand went up against my reading light and it turned on. When I stopped touching it, it went off." Holly says almost unwillingly, "This afternoon when I went to the Jacks during maths, the lights in the corridor, they turned off when I went under them, and then they turned back on when I went past." Selena says, "It's just there, like it was there all along, we just didn't know how to get to it till now." The walled Gothic school is surrounded by gardens and woods that take on an altered reality, where nature looms larger and tinged with magic as the girls sneak out of the dorms in the middle of the night. Another quote from the novel. The clouds are gone, but the moonlight is speeding faster, turning round them to the four girls who snuck out in the middle of the night. Something's shifting, something is happening. The white light comes from everywhere. The frost sings high in their ears. They run. The great spread of grass rolls out to greet them, and they skim down it. The crackle cold air flowing like spring water into their mouths. They're invisible. When they burst out of the run, it's into a white, waiting glade. They've never been here before. The tops of the cypresses blaze with frozen fire like great torches. There are things moving in the shadows, things that when they manage to catch a hair-faint glimpse are shaped like deer and wolves, or it could be anything circling. High in the shining column of air above the clearing, birds whirl, arc-winged, long threads of savage cries trailing behind them. They're spun out of themselves, spun to silver dust flying. They're nothing but a rising arm or a curve of cheek, in and out of ragged white bars of light. They dance till they collapse. When they open their eyes, they're in the glade they know again, darkness and a million stars in silence. The focus is fully on the girls, and though the novel is told partially through the perspective of the two detectives, they remain peripheral figures, witnesses to the ultra-natural world of adolescence transforming before their eyes. The narrative voice alternates between the detective Stephen Moran and an omniscient narrator who almost takes on at times the voice kind of a mystical power. French brings Conway and Moran back in her next novel, The Trespasser, probably the novel with the lightest touch of the uncanny. The suggestion is there with the unexplained shadowy figure at the end of Antoinette's street, ever watching her, and paired up with Stephen Moran again, a case of the murder of a single woman toying with metaphorical fire to find her father, is a scenario eerily reminiscent of Antoinette's own life. So in the world of French's first 6 novels, all police procedurals with repeating investigators, there are always hints of the uncanny. The settings are gothic, run-down, deserted, and even mythic with the archaeological dig. The novels are built on weird parallels and doubles, nightmares and coincidences, and as if the natural world itself is hypersensitive to human activity, French imbues her environments with monstrous creatures, unnatural sounds, and fleeting, distorted sights, elements to amplify the eeriness. Plant life is overgrown, animals threaten humans, woods, water, sky, darkness itself pose threats to us, claiming space in their world. These are murder stories where humans kill humans, yet the ever-watchful, assessing, and sometimes sinister presence of nature itself casts a shadow. So how does the uncanny factor into French's two most recent novels, The Witch Elm and The Searcher? They're also built upon strange coincidences, and they are also set in worlds with eerie reminders from nature of a power beyond the human world. They too are murder mysteries, but no longer do we have central consciousnesses from the Dublin murder squad. I'll begin with a discussion of The Witch Elm, and I'll delve a little bit more deeply into these last 2. Like her 6 earlier novels, this is a murder mystery set in contemporary Dublin and involves the Dublin murder detectives, but unlike the other novels, this one is narrated by a central character involved in the crime, actually plural crimes, not by one of the detectives whose methodical procedurals and personal lives structure the earlier novels. And the detectives we meet, through the sensibility of the narrator, are not recurring characters from earlier works. Toby Hennessy, the first-person narrator of The Witch Elm, is a 20-something, upper-middle-class, college-educated public relations man working when we first meet him for a Dublin art gallery. He's got a smart and sweet long-term girlfriend who runs her own vintage furniture business, a successful group of friends he has known since high school, a Bald Bridge condo, and a BMW. In the first chapter, the guys are talking about doing a stag trip to Bali before one of them gets married. Toby also has doting parents and a wider circle of aunts, uncles, and cousins. A bachelor uncle still lives in a large Georgian ancestral home somewhere in the south side of Dublin. By his own reckoning, Toby is a lucky guy. Things have come easily for him. He has a comfortable life, he doesn't make waves, and people like him. Then come the crimes. 4 to be exact. Each one more grievous. With the first, Toby colludes with a curator at the gallery to forge paintings for an upcoming exhibition by a fictitious young delinquent from the council flats with a rap sheet a mile long. This is a made-up person. And Toby manages to sidestep any repercussions when the scam is discovered. With second, Toby appears to be the random victim of a home invasion after a drunken night out with his mates. In the wee hours after passing out in his bed, he is startled to consciousness by noises in his living room, and then he startles 2 burglars ransacking his place. One dashes out the sliding glass door, the other kicks the bejesus out of Toby, a beating that would have killed him had he not regained consciousness long enough to call 999. His injuries are more are more than painful broken bones, teeth, and contusions. He also suffers a brain injury that leaves him confused, anxious, and with amnesia. The third crime is a murder that comes to the fore after a decade, a murder that implicates Toby, but because of his brain injury, he cannot remember enough of the circumstances, and his amnesic confusion introduces an air of the eerie. The body of a boy named Dominic from the secondary school Toby and his cousins Susanna and Leon attended, a boy everyone thought committed suicide right after his leaving cert 10 years before, is found decomposed in the trunk of an old wych elm in the back of the garden of the Hennessy family home. The fourth crime, the death of the investigating detective in the same back garden, places Toby smack in the middle of a violent murder. The lingering questions throughout the novel concern whether the criminal elements are connected or not, and how complicit is Toby with them all. In the midst of dealing with the physical and psychological aftermath of his assault, Toby's cousin, Susanna, tells them that their Uncle Hugo, the sole inhabitant of the South Dublin Georgian ancestral home, is dying. And since Toby is not going back to work yet, suggests he move into the big ivy-colored house as a caregiver. The cousins are deeply attached to both Uncle Hugo and the house, having spent several childhood summers there with him, and it represents a sort of haven for Toby. So he moves in, but the move also marks Toby's leaving his normal world for a strange and altered world. For the rest of the book, Toby's stream of consciousness brings the reader along as he struggles to speak without slurring his words, walk without dragging his foot, perform simple household tasks without feeling overwhelmed, and think of the past without a kaleidoscope, without sequenced images crashing into his consciousness. He is repeatedly bothered by the feeling that he is missing the subtleties of conversations when people speak to him, and that significant memories are just out of reach. Toby's perspective is thus a nightmare, rife with strange feelings and sensations, and we, the readers, are in that nightmare with him. By convention, cops are moral centers of police procedural fiction. They struggle to find truth and recalibrate the social balance in a dangerous world. The eerie and weird and frightening naturally attach themselves to that struggle. We, the readers, tag along with them as they work out the crime, and after trips and misses, frights and misunderstandings, we are with them as they find a solid answer in the shape-shifting purgatory of our world. With Toby as the narrator, we are deprived of that ride. The detectives are indeed detecting, but we see the story through Toby's eyes, and he is part of the problem. He is the center, but not the moral center or the fully conscious center of the story. Indeed, the one detective we rely on to figure out the truth, and I hope I'm not spoiling this for everybody, is killed. And Toby's own journey through the fog of amnesia to learn the truth of the body in the tree continues to drag us down into the hell of the human heart. Toby's girlfriend, who had moved into Ivy House with him, begs him to stop digging, to let the police do their work, but he can't stop. So she, the last link to that outside normal world, leaves. The problem for Toby is his memory. A hallmark, says a New York Times article, of all of French's fiction. Toby needs to find out if he is indeed Dominic's murderer before anyone else does. But since he cannot remember, he needs to investigate himself. It is this investigation, rife with the existential search for one's identity, that forms the core of the novel. Like the journey of Joseph Conrad's narrator in The Heart of Darkness, the longer Toby searches for the truth of Dominic's murder, the deeper his journey into himself, the deeper is his journey into himself, and the more frightening it becomes. The unfolding events of the plot are linked then as deepening layers of one malady. Toby's lifelong oblivion to those around him and the repercussions of his ignorance. Toby overlooking and then colluding with a fraudulent art show curator early in the novel is followed by the attack in his apartment. That is followed by the discovery of the murdered Dominic in the tree at Ivy House, followed by his cousin's gruesome revelations, followed by his own horrific deed that he unquestionably commits. From his own comfort zone, Toby has always ignored the realities of his world and his inadvertent complicity. and his inadvertent, let me read that over. Toby has always ignored the realities of his world and his inadvertent complicity with its corruption until he becomes the cause of more corruption. These events crash into Toby's sense of himself. Toby's investigation uncovers unsettling stories about his cousins, his parents, and his aunts and uncles. The central characters of the novel are the three cousins, privileged 28-year-old adults who are spoiled, materialistic kids. There was and still is a sense of entitlement about them, and a sense of having lost their moral bearings. The same holds true for and is perhaps due to the older generation. Toby's father is one of 4 brothers, 3 of whom have 1 child each, and one of whom never married because, as he says, quote, "I lost an opportunity and, well, just lost interest," end quote. That's Uncle Hugo. None of these characters appears interested in very much but material comforts, and none appear to take responsibility for their children. The 3 sets of parents go island hopping in Greece summers, leaving the 3 cousins with Uncle Hugo, who was so wrapped up in doing genealogies and bemoaning the fractured families he researches, that his teenage charges are left in fading splendor, holding high school parties rife with sex, alcohol, pot, and cocaine. Passed out bodies litter the house on a Saturday morning, while the parents sip ouzo on foreign beaches. And Uncle Hugo remains shut in his office wearing earplugs, even when casting a disinterested eye out the window and seeing a body being stuffed into the trunk of the ancient witch hazel tree. We see in Toby and his cousins the sum effect of generational neglect. And in the earlier home invasion, of Toby's earlier home invasion, we see the sum effects of societal neglect. French sets her fiction in the 19th century in various places, including the 19th century big house in the likeness, in an archaeological dig in the woods, in the woods, in the abandoned Celtic tiger housing estates in Broken Harbor, in an expensive girls' boarding school in The Secret Place, in yuppified and rehabbed inner city terraces in The Trespasser, and even in the old working class liberties in Faithful Place, places that bear witness to societal neglect. The South Dublin mansion in the Wych Elm speaks of old upper middle class Anglo-Irish lives whose descendants benefited. They were already wealthy, and then they benefited from the bubble of the Celtic tiger, but they are cushioned from its collapse because of old wealth. All the settings highlight to a different degree the connection of greed and oppression, and the impoverished underside of the privileged, Toby's burglars, who he described as skankers, smelling of sweat and nicotine from council housing with North Side accents, are pushing back. They are Toby's fictional artists come to life. So back to my topic of the uncanny. All the thematic levels of French's fiction are yoked together through the uncanny. Toby's first-person narration certainly lends a layer of fear to the story, but more potently, here, it's as if the universe itself is reacting to human depravity. Again, in the Wych Elm, the natural world seems to protest the callous disregard of the life of the characters. The body of a teenage bully is found stuffed in a tree trunk, as if the tree had devoured the boy, and the tree it's called a wych elm, the title alone. Tree branches and weeds trip Toby after the back garden is dug up by the police. Towards the end of the novel, and something of mythic size attacks the cousins as they argue in the garden. A quote from this. The I here is Toby, and the cousins are all arguing. I was reaching to grab him again. He was flinching back when I heard it. A noise up on the roof, wild volley of scabbling, something big on the slates, claws, talons. What the hell? I was off the terrace and backing into the garden before I knew it. Soft earth giving the slip sliding under my feet, my voice almost soft. What the hell was that? What, Leon? What? Leon hurrying after me, flailing as his ankle turned on a rock. Jesus, what? That noise, it's on the roof. Bird, Susanna says, catching up with us and turning to look. Or a bat. No, look. High up on the roof peak, black, crouched against the chimney stack. It was shaped like nothing. Feathery flicks like wings sprouting from its head. It was shifting, gathering itself, and from the deliberate focus of its movements, I would have sworn it was human. That's not a fucking bird. Look at the size of it. Those on its head, what are those? What kind of bird? Oh God, Leon moaned, pitch rising. Oh God. The thing raised itself and spread against the sky, out and out, beyond any bounds of possibility. Then it flung itself into thin air, straight towards us. Leon and I were both yelling, hoarse, strangled screams. I heard the rush of the thing coming at me as I ducked and stumbled, onto my hands and knees in the dirt. I felt the wind of it lift my hair. I smelled it wild and earthy and piney. I flinched from its talons, swooping with perfect, merciless accuracy to the back of my neck. I won't say any more about that novel, in case you haven't read it. Okay. And now what about French's latest novel? As I said earlier, I think The Searcher is French's best novel yet, but maybe that's because I just finished it and it's still rolling around in my head. At first, it does appear very different. It is the first novel set outside Dublin, first American protagonist, and first totally third-person narrator, pushing the narrative focus outside the head of the protagonist more than her other first-person narrative points of view. It's about a 40-something Chicago police officer who retires to a farm in the west of Ireland for its isolation and a simple life. And this is the novel. I promise not to give you any spoilers. The protagonist, Cal Hooper, does not have any Irish connections, but he does have rural American roots and self-reliant skills. The novel unfolds in layers, and while Cal is a retired cop, he is launched on an investigation that calls for his police skills. A 12-year-old Trey Reddy from the mountain that rises behind Cal's house asks Cal for help in finding Trey's brother Brendan, who has been missing for several weeks. Cal retired for peace, quiet, and solitude. At first he resists Trey's request, but finds himself drawn into a search for Brendan. The novel then moves like police procedural fiction, a search for truth in an unknown landscape. The cop is a central moral consciousness, even though retired and in the third person. Cal is in an unknown landscape. He is an outsider in rural Ireland where nothing is as it seems. The crack in the pub has hidden meaning. His neighbor Mark's surface banter and joking has ulterior motives. Trey is not who Cal thinks he is. There is a social hierarchy, an unspoken code of silence, shrouded in chatter, a powerful band of enforcers moving beneath the local guards, and secrets of history only memory and longevity hold keys to. Cal is navigating in the dark while at first thinking he sees clearly. With every step, he finds a piece of the Brendan puzzle, but he realizes there are multiple conclusions and directions from every discovery. Midway through the novel, Cal thinks more powerfully than ever that he has gotten himself into territory he says he doesn't quite understand. Cal is essentially as confused as Toby, and this is all scary stuff. Cal is supported in his quest to find Brendan through his own past, especially his childhood with his backwoods grandfather who taught him to fish and to hunt to survive alone in nature. He is also supported, another part of his past, by his experience as a policeman and knows how to methodically collect evidence and knows when danger lurks. Like all of French's novels, what hinders Cal's progress is not only an unknown terrain, but that very same past. His broken relationship with his wife and fractured relationship with his daughter. Like all of French's novels, the psychological intensity of the story revolves around a doubling of past and present, and the resolution is dependent upon either rewriting the past in the present or reliving the past in the present. The past also impacts the west of Ireland, and despite modern technology, creates a net around French's rural setting, both restrictive and protective. We see the restrictions with the trap the Reddy family cannot escape. Poor and uneducated mountain folks who will always be shunned. Trey intuits the family's social place in their environment before understanding it. Clever Brendan is gifted in science, but he knows his escape from poverty can never happen through the university. We see the protection emerge when city toughs bring drugs and when old bachelor farms are headed for ruin or turned into holiday retreats for rich foreigners. There are age-old traditions endangered, and the age-old inhabitants need the young to pass the farms on to keep the rural towns populated, hand down knowledge only their memories hold, memories that go beyond, but certainly do include how to make the smoothest poutine and how to find the best mountain peak. Cal is an outsider and aware of his outside status. Early in the novel, we read, quote, listening to Mart, Cal has started to get an inkling of how tangled up things get around here and how carefully you have to watch where you put your feet, end quote. French accentuates Cal as outsider with her trademark uncanniness. By page 3 of the novel, the spookiness surfaces. Quote, for the last week and a half, someone has been watching Cal. Probably longer, but he has had his mind on his own business, and he took for granted, like anyone would have a right to do amid all this empty space, that he was alone. His mental alarm systems were switched off the way he wanted them. And one night when he was cooking dinner, frying a hamburger on the rust-pocked stove's one working burner, Steve Earle, good and loud on the iPod speaker, Cal adding in the occasional crash of air drums, when the back of his neck flared. And that's what that hinky feeling. Then a few nights later in the pub, in the four-shop town of Ardnakelty, Cal hears 3 farmers wondering about a dead sheep. And one farmer says, took out its throat, its eyes, its tongue, and its arse, left the rest, end quote. By the end of the night, a young ruffian screams to Cal's neighbor that he'll burn him out. And on the car ride home, Cal sees luminous eyes low to the ground, reflected in the headlights, but can't find any animal in the bush. There's pub talk of aliens in the mountains, and Cal can't shake a restlessness that, quote, builds itself into an outright worry, the sharp buzzing kind that he can't pin down, that gathers speed as it prowls his mind and later runs around his gut, end quote. And amid all this, Trey tells Cal, my brother Brendan is missing. Later, Cal feels an intensive awareness of the spread of the dark countryside all around his house, a sense of being surrounded by a vast invisible web, where one wrong touch could shake things so far distant he hasn't even spotted them. He hears the story of the Mannion boy who burned a cat alive in a bonfire. Mark says he doesn't, quote, believe in harming any creature unless there's a need, end quote. Full on looking for Brendan, Cal awakens one night to, quote, a savage growl and sees, quote, a shape among the grass in his back field, loping towards the road at a good pace but with an odd, ungainly gait. A big animal or a hunched-over human being. All the stuff of those wilderness horror stories. These mysteries feed the plot and propel Cal on his own journey. A more potent uncanniness comes from nature itself. And I'll just read a little bit. I have a couple slides with quotes, and I won't read them all to you, so I'll just read one to illustrate the way he uses nature in an uncanny sense. So a more potent uncanniness comes from nature itself. And these are just some quotes from the novel, amid Cal's sixth sense that he's being watched, a hinky feeling that rises like goosebumps on the back of his neck, rain, and just look at the verbs that he uses. Rain whips the house, wind packs sodden leaves at the bases of walls and hedges, brooks jeer at Cal and make noises like raspberries, and don't move when Cal tries to shoo them away. Big fella bold as brass rats in vague gardens. The shortening days leave an edgy, blustery dark, and the sharp wind rattles the door and pushes at its edges to wrap cold around their ankles. Looking for a way in and not giving up. Cold comes straight for him in a honed wind, and as a sawtooth edge, the mountains rise brown and wild out of nowhere, commandeering the horizon. When later in the novel Cal ventures up the mountains to meet Trey, his climb takes on the guise of leaving an already confusing world and entering a dangerous secret one with legions of watchful guards. Cal seems under attack by nature itself, and I won't read through this whole long quote, but again we have nature itself seems to be grabbing him and puts his foot in the bog, and the bog won't let go. It wants to grab his boot. Birds seem to mock him. He sees a raptor, a bird of prey heading down their way. So again, nature itself seems to be malevolent here. And at the end, I use the language at the end, after this trip up the mountain that he takes with Trey, Cal's already gone from his known world in Chicago to this strange world in rural farm. And from there he goes to this other altered world up this mountain. He gets finally back down, and the mountain shadow bleeds. That word bleeds across the fields towards them. So I'll kind of leave the searcher now and hope that you feel interested in reading it. So how can we interpret the uncanny in French's novel? Eeriness, one more. So how can we interpret the uncanny in French's novels? Eeriness certainly reflects the unknown in each novel and acts as search for truth. The obstacles along the journey are created all by searchers, so that last novel is appropriately titled. So I used her title deliberately. That the obstacles along the journey are created by our own imaginations, by the characters' imaginations that shape their traumatic past. So we can see a lot of this eeriness comes from the imaginative or psychic perceptions the characters having. And I mentioned the traumatic past, and trauma, I think, is the kingpin of French's fiction. Well, I already suggested that the witch elm and the searcher are different because of the new narrative perspectives that change French's established lens of the police investigator. In truth, all of French's narrative voices are seekers of truth and victims of trauma. With the Dublin Murder Squad novels, the cases her murder DIs are investigating reveal the obvious trauma on the victims of the crimes and the criminals themselves. And for French's detectives, there are always echoes of the crimes of their own lives. The more profound exploration of trauma is in the lifelong effects of the lives of the detectives. The murder case that forms the plot of the novel acts as a catalyst, bringing the detective's past to the fore. In the woods, traumatic events around the lives of the residents of the housing estate as Rob and Cassie investigate the crime, cast several as suspects. But the most profound trauma is Rob's own. Whatever happened in the woods all those years ago, Rob cannot remember. Being assigned the case of the death of a 12-year-old in the very same place reveals that he has never recovered from the early experience. The dark shape that crosses the road, the nightmarish sounds during the overnight in the woods are signs of his troubled psyche. The significance of the eerie setting, an archaeological dig unearthing the secrets of the past, symbolizes the psychological digging and unearthing Rob faces. In a large sense, the natural world conspires to bring Rob to this point. Cassie Mattis's housemates in the likeness each had a fractured family story, traumas that have left personal voids they wish to fill by withdrawing from modern life and recreating a version of family in the secluded Wicklow Mountains. Cassie's own emptiness, her own lost family, her own unaddressed trauma surface as she becomes part of this pretend family. In the overgrown collection of trees and shrubs that surround the house, percolating with hidden sensibilities, prolonged Cassie's withdrawal. The Dublin Liberties, a faithful place, is the antithesis of both the moneyed upper-class Wicklow mansion and the sterile suburban housing development. The body is found in the house next to Frank's family, a family where alcohol and a father's abuse defined the family, and one Frank fled from 20 years before. Frank's own trauma of family violence was intensified by the disappearance of his girlfriend, of the girlfriend Frank was planning on running away with. While the murder is being solved, the novel explores the repercussions of family violence on children. Broken Harbor, French's fourth novel, faces head-on the suburban blight left by the failure of the Celtic Tiger. The story of a family traumatized by the contemporary financial reality of Irish life awakens the trauma of Kennedy's past that occurred in the same place. Coming of age itself is the trauma enacted in The Secret Place, the trauma of leaving the safety and limitations of innocence for the new world of experience in adulthood, a new world where sex and death exist and nature itself reflects the transformation, the lamb becoming the tiger. In the Trespasser, Antoinette Quinn's crippling boulder-sized chip on her shoulder is a result of never knowing her father and growing up in working class Dublin. Her victim, too, the victim in the novel, was searching for a father who abandoned her. The case forces Antoinette to face her own isolation. French returns to the exploration of the aftermath of trauma in the Witch Elm in full force. Toby's, certainly, after he is attacked, but a more complex exploration with the trauma Toby inflicted on others by simply being unaware. Susanna and Leon are both brutally bullied, threatened and attacked in high school by the popular athlete Dominic, and murdered the boy in the tree. Recounted almost robotically by Susanna towards the end of the novel, the story of Dominic preying on both Susanna and Leon and their solution at first read makes us deeply disturbed by Susanna's amorality and her unapologetic cold narrative of the murder. But on second read, Susanna's unfeeling account of being bullied, assaults that go unnoticed in plain sight by her contemporaries, and a bullying against which she feels no recourse with friends, parents, teachers, Toby himself, and even the police, emerges French's astute and frightening depiction of the lasting psychological effects of trauma. On the national level, this trauma plays out in post-colonial Ireland. The distrust of the police is a common trope in colonial Irish literature. The national trauma of oppression lingers not only in continued distrust of the police, but in a wariness of all authorities, and indeed in telling the truth itself. One of the uncles even uses the antiquated colonial word peelers for the police. None of the characters are candid during the investigation of Dominic's death. Repeatedly they say to each other, quote, "You didn't tell Rafferty that, did you?" End quote, about even incidental information. Uncle Hugo and the cousins are not even candid with each other. The distrust of authority first presents itself when Toby was in the hospital. He dislikes the pompous doctors, and he withholds information from them and the police investigating the break-in in his assault. The distrust resulting from trauma creates a constant tension with the pursuit of truth. Cal Hooper's trauma stems from two things. First, his family, the fracturing of his relationship with both his wife and daughter, and secondly, his job. Cal's partner's near shooting of a young black man. The New York Times review said that the backstory touches on the systematic racism that we've all been reading about in the newspapers for the last 6 or 8 months. And Cal is cast emotionally and morally adrift by his past. He cannot understand what happened to his life. His retirement to an isolated farm in the west of Ireland is his withdrawal from human contact. The eerie elements of the story reflect his lost direction and the constant onslaught of the natural world, a reality check, and perhaps a call back to engage with life. Towards the end of the novel, there is hope, as Cal reflects that, quote, "The morning has turned lavishly beautiful. The autumn sun gives the greens of the field an impossible mythic radiance and transforms the back roads into light muddled paths where a goblin with a riddle or a pretty maiden with a basket could be waiting around every gorse and bramble bend." All 8 of French's novels involve murder, searches for truth, confused memories, characters moving from the known world to an unknown world, and having to learn to navigate certain landscapes, and of course, trauma. And all of these themes are explored through her use of the strange, the frightening, and the uncanny. Thank you. All right. Yes.
I haven't read any of these books, but I think I want to. Are each of the books set in like the time of
time for our time present?
Our time, okay.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask this sounds really, really stupid. But
no stupid.
I have a really hard time reading something where you have to, like, this character had another name there, and this one is now this person, and I don't know, maybe my 73-year-old brain just can't handle all these details, but are these books do they flow along pretty easily?
They do.
Because it sounds fascinating.
They do indeed. People's names don't change.
Oh, good. They don't become somebody else.
They don't become somebody else.
Okay,
it's not
good.
that magical.
All right. And one last question. It sounds like I should read these in order.
Well, the first 6 have been billed as the Dublin Murder Squad series, and you do see some repeating detectives. However, each plot is standalone.
Okay.
So really, you could read the 4th novel, and you're meeting the story itself is self-contained.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Any Anybody have any comments about French's fiction or any questions?
You seen the show, Meg?
I have not.
I'm going to ask that, yeah.
It's on Stars, and we don't get Stars. Does anybody get Stars?
I do,
Oh.
but I haven't seen it. I record them.
You can see them. And I guess the second series is in the making. But I think the plot of the first season, the first 8 episodes, it combines 2 novels.
It's the first 2, so it's In the Woods and The Likeness. So it's
Oh.
a little confusing if you haven't read the book.
Yeah.
And do they have to change the
Is
plot?
it the girl detective, like the kind of the main character?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I would read, if you're going to watch it, read In the Woods and The Likeness to be able to understand, like,
Okay, the show.
Because
the
Rob's
show.
not at all in The Likeness.
Well,
Right.
it follows Kat, so it's
It follows Cassie.
Adam and then Kathy overlap, like they carry her story
I
over.
see.
Yeah.
I see. So it's almost like 2 different stories in the 8th season.
Yeah,
Or
they
the 8
kind of,
episodes.
they break it up like that.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, one of the things I did read, and how many of you have read In the Woods? Just, I don't want to, again, spoil any too much. But when you're reading the novel, you have these 2, you learn about Rob's experience in the past when he was a 12-year-old little boy and his 2 friends disappeared and are never found. And he's found covered in blood. And then here we are 20 years later, and it's a 12-year-old girl who has been murdered, and he's investigating that. The one thing, as you're reading these, of course you want to solve both. You want to find out how both are solved.
Yeah.
And you find out how the current murder, you find out how that's resolved, but you still don't find out what happened to Rob as a little boy. And I know I'm in a book club, and we read this, in my suggestion for the book club, and all of my friends in the book club couldn't believe it. They said, we want to know what happened to him as a little boy. And apparently French said in an interview, in her mind she knows.
Oh.
And she purposely wants to keep it out of the story, but she may revisit it in a later work.
Yeah, it should be. I don't like those kind of untied endings, I'd forgotten that was frustrating.
She did say, I guess in another interview, that for her next novel, she's toying with the idea of, let me see where I read this, a folk horror for her next novel.
Well, there's plenty of that. So obviously I missed the lecture, I'm sorry, but did you mention like the fact that Ireland has a pretty low crime rate, like in real life?
I did not.
Yeah, like do you find that interesting that she's choosing to write about really gruesome murders and actually we have a very tiny, like there's some drug, kind of gang related stuff, but we're not known, thank God, for our crime, so that's why I mentioned in the folk thing, like there's terrible murders 100 years ago.
Yeah. But isn't that true of most TV shows, detective shows? I'm trying to think, what was the name of the one set in Oxford? What was that called? Inspector, right. That, I mean, there's not that many murders in the little town of Oxford.
Yeah.
Every week.
One every week.
I know.
Well, I suppose I'm just so used to American crime fiction, and here we are in Albany with how many shootings and stabbings in a year. Like, so, you can understand it in an American milieu, but not in, this is kind of Ireland.
Yeah.
So I have to say, I kind of thought it was strange to see Ireland portrayed so modernly, which is that. But yeah.
It's really interesting. Even in The Searcher, where he's out, and he's in a very rural area, and I think County Sligo might be mentioned, although she purposely doesn't give us real places.
Mm-hmm.
But, they're talking about his iPad, and he's looking on YouTube for how to repair something in this house that is, very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
So the modern world certainly
Is there.
there. And he calls his daughter back in Chicago on his cell phone.
Yeah. I suppose I just the violence I grew up in Ireland was political violence, and in a very specific location kind of, and so it's interesting that there's crimes of passion and crimes of the opportunity in her books, but you don't really hear about them with Ireland, but obviously they happen.
Well, I think, and it gets back to this idea of trauma, and even gets into, national trauma, post-colonial trauma. She's using the murder mystery genre, I think, to capture that. That's her vehicle to get at that trauma.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
Without giving away the ending, why did you like The Searchers so bad?
I don't know, maybe it's, again, because I just read it. Maybe every time I finish one, it becomes my favorite. One of the things in The Witch Elm, you know, like, the characters are not that likable. I don't know if those of you who read it. And you know, she does a great job getting inside, especially the main character's mind, and he's been hit in the head, so the way she even portrays his confusion, and she characterizes them well, but you just don't like them. But I really liked the main character in The Searcher, Calvin, but you like the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that could be why, but it also could be I just finished it. Anybody have any other comments about French herself? Any other? Why do you like her? Those of you who have read her. Yeah.
I feel like I'm looking at some of these books and remembering, but she kind of gives you a feeling of what the socioeconomic situation is in the book. Like, I remember in the woods, she talked about how Alcatraz were on the dole, and just give you an idea of what it might have been like at that time. And at a fateful place, I felt like that,
Yeah.
people that didn't have a lot of money and what it was like, and Broken Harbor, it really kind of gave me an idea of these ghost
The ghost
developments.
estates.
And I went online and I was like, oh my gosh,
Absolutely.
it's terrible. But we in America don't know about what that's like. And I learned things, I feel like I learned things about Ireland at different times in history.
Absolutely.
Recent history.
Every one of her settings really has its own significance. Because even in the woods, there's a controversy. It's sort of in the background of the novel, the archaeological dig that the city council wants to put a highway over it, but this archaeological dig is unearthing all of these important things, artifacts from the past. So there's even that tension hovering over the past.
I feel like it would disturb the fairies. There was some concern about that. Like some people actually.
And that happened in real life, when it was in Clare, a man chained himself to the whitethorn tree, and in the end they built the road around the tree, because it was a fairy tree, and it was long, significant in Clare, like with fairy stories, and it was known as a site kind of for healing, and so they left it alone, But we've had this again and again, and there was recently construction near Tara in Dublin, and they found all the Viking stuff, and they did the city offices over it. So it is interesting, as you say, to see it from that point of view, it's not just easy to knock something down, because someone's going to complain, or there's a very rare snail, and they've got to move them all, so
Yeah, all the settings are. I'm just thinking in the likeness too, you have this manor house, and right on the manor house is the ruin of the family cottage, side by side. And even in a flippant way, one of the characters in the manor house, these are Trinity College, contemporary Trinity College graduate students, and they're making some wisecracks about, the people who live down in the cottage, that we were we're protected up here in the manor. So even a little bit of that.
Yeah, the class,
Yeah, the class. Did somebody else's hand go up back there? No? Well, I hope I didn't spoil any of the endings for you. I tried to shy away from that.
Don't forget.
Just whet your appetite to read them.
Yeah, really, I think these are, they're murder mysteries, and those are enjoyable genres. But I think this is really serious literature.
Yes, she is.
I think she really straddles that.
Yeah. And it's great to read something about Ireland that isn't sure in Vigara, and famine, and immigration is so bad, So it's this is a modern, thriving, albeit complicated, and contrasting Ireland, So even though I'm saying, it's terrible, there's no murders, but Ireland is a modern country, and so it's great to see it portrayed as that,
Right.
Or that it isn't just the IRA, and a bit of other stuff going on. So it's great. Okay, well, thanks, Mike.
All right, well, thank you.
Have you back? And everyone has to borrow all the books. Good. Well, thank you.
Good, thank you.